Yeah, that's kind of odd. That's, is there any kind of way to turn it down? Yeah. It's not in that writing. Just in this.
That's true. Well, you can start a song going. Check it out.
Oh, well, are you sure about that?
I don't know.
You were
You have some information that I'm lacking.
I do not.
Is it still too much light for the camera?
Well, I was sitting here.
Yeah.
Okay. When you get a teacher sitting, it might balance it, yeah. Those-
How about I can text you?
Yeah.
Thank you. It was so dark in here. Pull up for question and answer. Calling all students. Dharma students.
Trying to be
What time are you coming in tomorrow? Early. I'm coming to get here all day.
9, maybe 10? Probably 9. Okay. I sort of knew that you were going to be here all day, but I just wondered.
I'm not gonna tell you guys. And I got
Yeah. They were just asking about if we could get a figure for ring school. But if I could do it before 9, I would do it. I don't live that far away.
I think they just were here. For your feet.
Usually Mondays and Thursdays are good days.
So maybe this is our kids.
In the meantime,
hold my, yeah, farther away.
I just don't quite know what they do. But let's say 3 for now. So it might be 2:30.
Yeah, that'll be my first time. It was different.
Well, he did do something.
Should we just start the Q and A with you?
Do you know whose notebook that is? That's a pretty fun.
And I would guess it would be done earlier than that.
Is it a book or a notebook?
It's a book. It's a book. If you look in the front of it, which happens to be what we would call the back of it,
She's getting it.
is picture.
Oh, let's see, let's see.
Well, the Chinese. So this,
Is that a Chinese book?
yeah, it's Chinese. This was published just in September when we were in Taiwan. We actually were invited to the book launch party.
So what's the title?
It's about the Ganges Mahamudra.
Relations to telepathy.
Well, read us a few.
Well, I can ask Google Translate to do that.
You take a picture of it.
Actually, I tested Google Translate with this. And it came shockingly close to making sense.
It's better than the signs we tried to translate.
Oh, some of those were very.
Wow, I didn't know you ever. I didn't know you ever ate like. Good. I'm glad. Oh, we're beginning.
Voices down over there.
It actually replaces the Chinese characters with English words.
You're joking.
No, he's not.
All right.
Prove it. That's phenomenal.
It is.
It's just like in a movie.
Yes. Definitely, just like in
Closed caption.
Can we hear it in any voice when we read it?
Sweden.
You'll have to turn it.
She gonna talk out loud?
You're on Ustream though.
In the meantime,
In the
somebody can do
meantime.
something useful.
So what would you all like to talk about today? Talked out. It's never happened yet, but. Okay,
Could you speak about the meaning of the Buddhas as the transcendent conquerors?
at the what?
The transcendent conquerors, that's how it's translated in Chinese. Isn't it?
Yeah. Tell me again.
Talking about the,
What is your understanding of the Buddhas as the transcendent conquerors?
Oh, okay. That's the piece I was missing. Well, we need to ask the question, the key to that, I think, is exactly what are they conquering? Right? So, it's not uncommon in Buddhist writings to find metaphors that at least appear to be related to war and other kind of violent things. But I think in this case we can dispense with that pretty much and just ask the question like what is being conquered here. So you might say that all of us as serious Dharma practitioners are conquerors in the sense that we would like to conquer the causes of suffering. We would like to undermine our attachment and firm belief in the inherent existence of a self, for example. We would like to overcome jealousy and pride and greed and anger and all the rest and become useful for others. Those are transcendent aspirations in the sense that they transcend our ordinary aspirations in the world. But they don't, that aspiration alone does not conquer the very thing that we're going for. And so, working on the material, working on ourselves, working on delusion and all the causes of suffering, the deeper we understand what the delusion is and what its base is, the more we can feel confident in and apply an antidote to that. And as we apply the antidotes over time, then we begin to overcome those causes of suffering. So we could say we actually are conquerors at that point, but transcendent conquerors have overcome those causes and they're engaged in it still. So it's an issue in my small way of understanding it, and I don't mean that just a kind of false humility around it. I think that we're really talking about what individuals do who have transcended the causes of suffering. So no need for false humility. The real thing will do just fine. It's like, in other words, we all would like to. We suffer. We would like to be free of that suffering. We also have experienced joy. We'd like to know what transcendent joy is like. And as we understand what the causes of suffering are and how we bring about our own suffering, needlessly but almost inevitably, we want to be free of those things. And that is, you might say, one of the first big steps. But we have not transcended all of those things, and therefore we could say we're at least aspiring conquerors, but we're not transcendent conquerors. I think it's reasonably on the mark, just off the cuff. I have a cuff. No link, but a cuff.
You want the technical pieces of that?
Yeah, sure. Of which?
Of
The
Chom-
transcendent conquerors?
Yeah, Chom Din Day.
What do we get?
We have Chom, which is part of more words, but meaning the one who is victorious over the Maras, the four Maras. And then Din, meaning one who has the qualities of an enlightened person. I'm sure there's more to it. Then De, meaning one who has transcended the world and passed into nirvana, which I know is short for Nyangenle Depa.
So it's Chomden,
Chom Din De.
Chomden Day.
So,
And what language
Really
is that?
short for the word would
Tibet.
be.
yeah.
It's
I mean,
translated
I don't know if you,
Right here.
did you say that?
Yeah, the Buddha's, this is
It's
from,
really
this is
short.
from the refuge prayer.
Okay,
We
First
go
one.
for refuge to the Buddhas that transcend
all right,
time.
you got me lost because you had your phone. I thought you were taking.
So it's a descriptive term for Buddhism.
So all those realms that are described, I think are available in one lifetime. We can experience all of them. over and over again, probably. Which probably also means that we could also find ourselves in Dewa Chen, right? And so, well, let's say that it's possible to live in Dewa Chen.
Yeah, let's say it.
So, yeah, I mean, in this life, you know, to, yeah.
Ringotuku was asked that question of the land there.
Can you speak?
What?
Oh, I don't think the
Use the
mic's on.
microphone. Is it on?
It's on. It's listening, it doesn't have time to amplify.
It doesn't, it's not.
Oh, yeah, maybe that's it. Somebody asked him if he could describe, like for example, the Pure Land of Yidam Tara, and what the and a few other things about Tara's Pure Land and Amitabha's Pure Land and so on. And his response was kind of what I would expect from him. And he's certainly not the only one who's taught it, but I always find it easy to have confidence in. And that is, he said, when your mind is pure, as Tara's mind is pure, you are in Tara's Pure Land. In the moment that your mind is defiled by something like hatred or desire or something, you are in the hell realm. And you can go back and forth between those faster than you can imagine. And if your mind is stable and pure, then you're there for longer or more stable. Or if it's completely stable and pure, then that's just where you are. It's what you experience. And then he thought about it for a moment, and he said, so really what it comes down to is what you experience is what you are. So it's a nice piece in relationship to interdependence. So we all know how to generate loving kindness and compassion. We also all know how to generate hatred and all the other things. So if we focus on one of those and make some progress, then that progress will become part of our experience. And if whatever direction we go on it will become part of our experience. And the more we stabilize that direction, the more it'll become more of our experience. So I think that there's a certain practical aspect to that, even without knowing what transcendent means. We can all have the direct experience that what I fill my mind with is what I get. You know? It's like you fill the bucket with useless stones, you get a bucket with useless stones. If you fill it with jewels, you get a bucket of jewels. Like it has a kind of simple straightforwardness about it also. I think that's...
So is saying mantra one of the antidotes to the invasion of the mind with poisons?
It could be. It could be. I certainly think it's possible to say Chenrezi's mantra, and while you're saying the mantra, completely pollute the mind. But again, if we pay attention to our experience as primary thing is my experience. So if I want a different experience and I have to do something different, I mean it's very close to our kind of cheesy sayings about things. If you want something different, you have to do something other than what you've been doing. While that's become kind of a cheesy cliche, it also has a fairly large element of truth in it. You just do the same thing over and over, and you'll just get the same thing over and over. The downside of that is that it's easy to deny that, because you never do the same thing over and over. It's just like every other experience that we have. It comes once, you don't get that experience again. You get something that looks kind of like it, and then we say to ourselves, I just had that experience yesterday. And so we start stepping on the profundity of the understanding by not encouraging ourselves to have an experience of freshness with each experience that arises. So it's not, while I think the truth is kind of simple in one way, the actual way that we work with that truth and what we do with it is not so simple. At the point where we're on the path and trying to work with it, we find all these little things that are challenging. But great teachers will often say, at the other end, it's simple again, like really simple. And occasionally we have that experience, don't we? Of like, whoa, it just looks totally straightforward and simple. And then in subtle ways we step on it again. I think it's fair to say, we often talk about the mind training tradition, but in a larger context, it's totally fair to say the entire Dharma, all of the paths are all about mind training. There isn't anything else. They may not be part of the mind training tradition in and of itself, which is okay, but from a broader understanding of just the words mind training, this is it. It's like everything you do within the context of your Dharma practice is mind training. So therefore we're encouraged to be very careful about what we do all the time, understanding that everything we think and do and say will have its impact. And in the larger sense, then we talk about karma like that. But personally, I think it's actually more helpful to kind of have a light foot, as it were, on the karmic accelerator. It's like don't put too much there. I think the mind training piece is actually better because we're very close to that. I want to train my mind to experience a sense of equanimity in relationship to others, whatever the difference is. And also understanding that there are no two that are not different. There's no such thing. There's no identicals. So I want to train my mind to embrace all of that. So that's like in the moment when I see I'm making a harsh judgment against somebody who I don't know, who's probably doing their best, and I can just, make the list of the reasons why it would be good to manifest a sense of equanimity in relationship to them. When I find that spot and I feel the equanimity, that's in the moment. So I don't need to assign karmic qualities to that. I think the karma aspect, just speaking from my own side, it's more powerful for me to see a transformation in the moment than to put too much weight on the karma that comes from doing something good or messing something up. I see people sometimes beat themselves up with that. And while we're beating ourselves up, the potential insight is going by. That's the other thing. We're losing opportunities continuously. We're just leaking. That's my own sense of it. I just think that's, yeah. Linda.
So, I'm struggling with doing what you suggested, like looking at everyone as if they've been my mother before.
Yeah.
And so when I do that, and I look at somebody, for example, Trump, and
Why did I know you were gonna say that?
because it's so present
In your face.
around people, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
And so then I coming from me, idealistic me, it's like I can do that.
Do what?
Look at him as a mother and hope that there's something, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, he's got Buddha nature at the core. He just doesn't see it yet. And in the meantime, all these bad things are happening because of him. So it's like I don't want to have this fear, because I believe that what comes through my head and out my mouth is what happens, what you just said. And so I don't want to be locked up in fear.
Yeah.
And yet, how do you stay realistic with what's going around? You know, the different things that are happening. It's like I'm wrestling with this.
Yeah.
Am I too idealistic? Like I have too much hope? Too optimistic that things are going to turn out okay? Or maybe I don't know anything about, maybe it is going to turn out okay. So I just, not sure what to do with that. For myself, you know, how do I?
I don't think you're being too idealistic. But you might be if you're adding your idealistic thing to your practical thing and dividing by 2 and calling that the place to be. In other words, you've got the terrible confusion on the one hand, at least as what it looks like, terrible confusion that also has deep effect on many people. And so we have a sense of there's terrible confusion, but also behind that is the Buddha nature. So now if you add the terrible confusion of the Buddha nature and divide by 2, it sounds reasonable. But what you've done is you've compromised your ability to hold the view that somebody actually does have Buddha nature, because it doesn't look that good anymore. You just polluted it with the confusion piece. So I think there's a space for both of these things. We've all been confused. We've all known people who look to us like, whoa, really confused. And I don't mean just Mr. D. but we've all known that. And you can go and sit in any psych ward and see it all the time. It's not unique. It's easy to see. And it's not so hard to hold the view, especially in the psych ward, that these people actually are endowed with the awakened mind. That's actually pretty easy. Even if they tend to be violent, even if they tend to be really sweet and kind and confused and suicidal or whatever it is, it's not difficult to hold the view that they are endowed with Buddha nature. They're not threatening us. That's helpful. So I think I would put these 2 things in 2 buckets. You can look at somebody who feels like they're a threat to the world, in fact, I think, and still hold the view that they're a threat to the world. I don't need to compromise that and say, well, it's only half as bad as I think it is, because it might be twice as bad as what you think it is. And by nature then also cut the awakened mind in half too. So better to hold those 2 views like 100% each.
Okay.
And then you feel like you're not cheating yourself out of your kind of worldly intelligence also, which is not a negative thing. I mean, if you actually have intelligence of the relative world, that's considered a very, good state. Good to have that. You know how to go shopping, you know how to save money, you know how to fix a wound, you know how to do lots of things. we don't compromise those things in the ways that we're imagining here. We do them. And I think this is really the same. Go 100% in both of those directions. 100% confused and 100% endowed with Buddha nature. So what do you have to do to uncover the Buddha nature? Now you're much closer to the solution than when you compromised it.
Yeah, that's helpful, thank you.
It's definitely not a moral averaging process.
No.
This is kind of like, well, if somebody has Buddha nature and they also should have their appendix out, and then you do half a surgery.
Yeah.
It actually just doesn't make any sense at all. And it's something I think it's really, really hard for us to think about anything that smacks of goodness, and Buddha nature sort of smacks of goodness, and not put it in this kind of, at the level of moral equivalencies. It's not something that's operating like that. It's a bit more like, well, if you have pigments and you have some kind of solvent to make paint, they're not the same. You don't, they each does something completely different. So it's really necessary to look at it that way.
I thought something that Ringo Tulku said was really helpful about how we talk about things and the words we use. He made that distinction about the difference between hope and expectation. And that, to me, that we confuse that.
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking a lot about the words that we use and how we name our experience and talk about it to ourselves.
It's good to ponder those things like that. It's helpful for me pondering it. It's just helpful for my viewpoint. I can kind of see more colors in the thing. It's more interesting instead of just threatening somehow. And I think it's also helpful for others, because this pondering that we're talking about right now actually can be almost 100% secular. So for people who have not an inclination toward or no inclination towards Buddhist practice or perhaps any spiritual tradition, they are most impressed by conversations and speech that does not require them to embrace something that they don't want to embrace. And so I think the conversation we're having right now is a great example of that. These things can all be put, you can think of the inherent goodness of all beings. You don't have to talk about Buddha nature, just the inherent goodness of all beings, and talk about Donald Trump or anyone else, Adolf Hitler if you want, as potentially, not just potentially, but fully endowed, never realized. And there's a way in which people can open themselves to that when there's options there that are actually interesting to explore, as opposed to you're wrong, I'm right, which never opens any door. So I think
Nobody's wrong or right.
yeah, that's in a certain way even worse.
Yes.
How we doing? What do you think, Linda?
Yeah.
Well, you smiled. That's pretty nice.
I'm always smiling.
No, you aren't.
No, this is helpful for me. Yeah.
Judith, yeah.
Could you,
So nice to see you.
thank you, it's so nice to see you.
It's been a long time since you were here. Okay.
You mentioned this morning that, Gotoku talked about an equivalency between interdependence and emptiness.
Interdependence and
Yeah.
Could you say more about that? I don't know how to
somebody out at SCOL, I don't actually remember the person who asked it, or even if it was one of the retreatants, but they asked about emptiness and how to, if he could give some advice for how to go deeper into it. And his first response was very terse. He just said, there's nothing there. It's like emptiness is all about interdependence. And that's actually a fairly classic description of emptiness. And I said this morning that somebody who was, like Ringo Tulku, maybe, who had a significant level of realization, under certain circumstances might say that differently, because we're talking about ultimate truth. And so ultimate truth has to be dispensed very carefully, not just to anybody all the time who might ask a question about it. And his response was, I think, appropriate for where he was and who was asking and all, but even though I don't remember who it was. But basically, it looks like this. It's a relative truth understanding of emptiness, is what it is. All things are interdependent. We don't say all things in the relative world are interdependent. We just say all things are interdependent. Not only are all things interdependent, like all things are green, which would give some specific thing to things, but rather that all things appear the way they appear due to the truth of interdependence. So you understand the truth of interdependence, I think, is it not? What do you mean?
I understand what you just said, that all things appear as they appear because of interdependence.
Well, think of something that is not dependent upon something else. Give me an example. 15 seconds less and you don't get the money.
I can't think of anything in the relative world that is not dependent upon something.
Exactly. So, does that mean that it does not have inherent existence? Because inherent existence is defined as not dependent upon something else. So if it's not dependent upon something else, then, yeah, can you just tell me one thing like that? As good Buddhists, well, yeah, I better cross that out. As charlatan Buddhists, our own lineage, what interdependence, when he says emptiness is nothing but interdependence. So it wasn't a pun on nothing is emptiness and all, nothing like that. It was really like it was a serious thing. It is nothing more than interdependence, which means that when you look out and you try to find something that is inherently existent, not dependent on anything else, self-arising, these kinds of words which are used a lot in the Vajrayana and the Dharma in general, therefore it does not inherently exist. It exists by virtue of its dependence on other things. Water freezes because of the cold. Water is not inherently cold, nor is it even inherently liquid, but depending on conditions, it appears in different ways, which you might say, it's kind of a thumbnail sketch of the entire relative world. Everything appears by virtue of other things that are also appearing or not to us. So if you look at all of that, you could say, in the relative world, all things are empty of inherent existence, which is the same as to say, all things are dependently arising, dependent on other things. So now, if he was sitting here, he might say, that's not what I meant to say. and I'd love to hear what he'd say. But I feel reasonably sure that's what he was pointing at when he said it's nothing other than interdependence. It is the first kind of, if you said, like, insight into the nature of phenomena, both outer phenomena and phenomena we experience internally, like our emotions. These things arise dependent upon all of our experience. They come to pass, which is why we have so much trouble dealing with them. Because there's not one single cause. You make me angry. From this perspective, that's an impossibility. You don't have that power. And when I say, you make me angry, I've just given away the power that I had to see its actual nature. So seeing our own unfolding of experience in a kind of interdependent way is there. That's why it's so important. Otherwise, we can never get a handle on it. It's always got us by the throat, you might say. So this is a grand door. The Dalai Lama once talked about impermanence as the first door to understanding emptiness. Interdependence is another level of impermanence. It's kind of an elaboration on impermanence. Now we're talking about a kind of permanence, you might say. That is to say, the permanent interconnectedness of things, how they influence each other and how they connect and disconnect. They're always like swirling back and forth. And so that's a little bit more difficult to see the emptiness than all things are impermanent, therefore they're empty of inherent existence. One step up is all things are empty of inherent existence because they depend upon other things in order to even be. And the things they depend on more things. It's kind of an endless chain. So if you look at that enough and contemplate it, you've just gone through the door, one of the great doors, really. And in some areas of Buddhism, this is the emptiness. It doesn't go anywhere else. It's a door into understanding emptiness. What's nice about it is that actually it's fairly easy to understand, and it undermines all of our kind of grand sense of what it must be like to understand emptiness. We're continually floating around in that place. If we just stop and take notice of the interdependence, we're witnessing the emptiness as witnessing the utter absence of inherent, independent existence. So I want to say one last thing, which is I always find very intriguing. How do we come to experience something? So there was a Lama down in San Francisco once who visited who said, if something was truly inherently existing, we would not be able to experience it. And my first thought was, why is that? And I mean, this was a Tibetan Lama. He was pretty up on science and things. He says, it's because everything you experience is experienced through change. Like, you touch a hot stove and you experience that in your finger. Why? Because the heat moved from the hot stove into your finger, and then there were all these biological things that happened, and then you went, ouch, like that. And there's a whole chain reaction of experiences that occur there. All of them include change. So he said, supposing there was something in the room that utterly did not change. It was just there. And he said, how would you experience it? My first thought seemed like, that's a dumb question. I'm looking at it. And he said, well, looking at it involves a whole series of physical and physiological and psychological changes taking place. If you remove all of those, because it's inherently existence, you can't have those in relationship to it, you can't experience it. So he said we may be surrounded, I think he was joking, but he says we may be completely surrounded by things which are inherently existing, but we'll never know that. I just thought that was an intriguing proposition, I just gotta say. I don't know where I sit with it at this point, but I thought it was very cool also to hear from a fairly young Tibetan teacher, so. Anyway.
It's one little piece
Yeah.
about the impermanence. We tend to think about things being impermanent and things being dependent.
Yeah.
The
The
notion,
thingness is.
the thingness of it can be investigated either through the interdependence or the impermanence to find out, like, at what point you actually get something that is impermanent. Where if you keep on pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, you don't get a thing that is impermanent. For just the reason you're talking about. You can't actually get there. So then that actually gets, then we have a thread to pursue in looking at our experience. We want to talk about emptiness, and we want to talk about it. Because that's what we do.
That's what we do.
Talk about stuff.
We're so good at it.
But talking about it, Rinpoche's general approach is he talks about stuff in order to give you something to work on, in order to be able to explore something, to go into it, to find some transformation in the process. And in this case, both interdependence and impermanence are actually really great places to go if you want to really start to go deeper into this. What is this emptiness business that everybody talks so much about? Because those are things, we can start with something like, okay, I've got a tea bag. I know it's here. I got something to start with. It's just where I am and where my experience is. I can start here. I can start with anything in my experience that's very obvious. And then I just look more and more closely, become more and more intimate with all the dimensions of that. And that will lead in a very kind of direct, non-elaborate, non-intellectually sophisticated way directly into the experience. And it's so easy to hear the word emptiness, and then you've got stuff, and then you've got emptiness. Someplace you've got this thing that obviously can't have anything to do with stuff. But actually to use the approach of beginning with looking at our experience and contemplating, we start out with interdependence, contemplating impermanence, and then to use that as a basis for allowing the mind to our awareness to kind of settle into our experience in fresh ways, where the stories that we generally tell ourselves about teabag, it's like, okay, let's see, that wasn't a good enough story, actually. And when you find out that the story wasn't quite good enough, then you look in a fresh way. If the story about teabag is good enough, it's done. Teabag, what? That's the end of it. There's no more exploration.
But the difficulty, a big part of the difficulty seems to be that things don't appear interdependent to us. They appear inherently existent if we don't examine. So we go around in the world. I think it's important to say this part. If we experience them as interdependent all the time, there'd be no problem. No self, no other, no problem. But that's not how it appears. This seems like a puja table, there it is. And if it's mine, then there's even more stuff on it. But if it's yours, if it burns up, it gets lost, it's your problem. But if it's mine, now it's even got more on it. So that's the difficulty, is that it appears inherently self-existent, independent, self-sufficient. When it appears to me I do not experience this came from a tree and water and sun and a carpenter, I have to play that whole thing out in a clunky way to start with, and kind of train myself past, you know, this is cotton inside, I can see a zillion things had to come together for this. No, that's not how I experience it at all. So I think it's important to say what the, you know, to really look at the difficulty of how we experience it now, which is the delusion. And then we go to all this, like, oh, it's interdependent, and yes, I can keep working with that, and all my attachment and aversion loosen. They loosen, you know. So, I don't know, for me, that's an important thing to be stated, how it appears to me in an everyday way. You all seem way separate from Zopa. But I know
Way
that
separate
can't
from
be
Zopa.
true.
Except for Zopa. So
Separate from Zopa. Well, there's some beings in here that seem separate from me too. Some of them I want separate. But you know what I'm saying? That's the difficulty, is our ignorant obscurations have us experiencing the world in a way that's really delusional. And the further we get over on the continuum of, as I said, my stuff, your stuff, then we're into the I'm right, wrong, and we go to war. So,
However,
tricky business.
there is I mean, I think that the other side of that
Yeah.
is that if we look and see, like, what do we need to do about this? I think one of the approaches that we can take, which is not easy, but no insight practice is easy. The easy thing, though, to understand that we might do is we look at something, and in the moment of investigating, we can see, I see that is not what it appears to be.
Right, we can do
That's
that.
not so hard. Once you've worked with it a little bit and figured out, like, how it is that this thing does not inherently exist, it doesn't take too long to be able to generate that insight again, over and over. But as soon as we finish the insight and we hear the lunch bell ring, the cup is there. It's inherent.
And
It
the
comes,
lunch is there.
and lunch is
And
there,
the person in my way
especially.
is there.
Yeah. So, but inherent in that, all of that, is that you have all the evidence in the world to be completely confident that you could stabilize that experience.
Yes.
And the way that you do that is obvious. You just keep making the experience. You keep looking. And pretty soon the looking becomes a little more automatic. And gradually it becomes stable.
Yeah.
And then when our emotions arise, we recognize their instability. We recognize that they're, waves on the ocean of experience, and nothing more and nothing less. So I think that also is important, is that this is not some magical, extremely high insight to have. It's the stabilization piece that is really, really difficult, because the degree to which we're distracted in the world is the degree to which we're actually not going to repeat the insight over and over. Which I think leads us to why do people go and live in caves?
And for most people, if they've never even heard the theory, they're not even going to do it the initial time, much less stabilizing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, that's right.
Most people, if you go through that thing about the cup,
Mm-hmm.
they're like,
It's 100.
It's
It's
a cup, I mean,
100%
it's a cup.
conceptual.
what's that?
It's 100% conceptual, and it doesn't bear any fruit. Well, I won't say what doesn't bear any, but it bears almost no fruit until it begins to move into the
Yeah.
experiential.
Yeah, and it takes a bit of time.
Yeah.
And intention. And
What's that?
Attention, intention.
Oh,
that's
attention, I think you said
separate.
intention.
Well, both. Attention and intention. You have to have the intention to take it apart every time.
Well, and then you're looking at, just like you look at the cup and think, well, you know, this is how the porcelain is made, this is how the cup is formed, this is how all these things happen. We also, really, more important than this cup, we look at our mind and we see,
Yes.
I want this, I don't want that, and all the extension on that. And then if we look through the lens of understanding the interdependence, we can see how it is that we came to feel like I am this, or I am that. I am right, you are wrong, all of these dichotomies and things. So I think that's also, this is why I think it's safe and clear to say all Dharma is mind training, and we're talking just about these things as that's what the mind training is. I think you could take any lineage and any authentic Dharma teaching and see how it's mind training. It's like, what else would it be than that? At least as a first cut. Where it goes later, you know, as you accomplish some yidam practice of some kind, which contains so many different levels of meaning. I imagine that may include a different level of understanding than the kind of mind training that we're talking about. I
It's
don't know
still
that, but I think
mind
it's
training.
it's still mind training.
though.
Yep.
If the Buddha said it out, it's mind training.
Yeah.
He said it's
Yeah.
about the mind.
The mind is your dog.
Mind is the
You wanna train it.
forerunner of
One of the pieces of interdependence that we haven't talked about, and it's easy to talk about a story leading to this present moment where this table is here. But one of the reasons that we say, okay, yeah, like, okay, it's a table, yeah, a lot of stuff happened. Next. There is something kind of in the magic of it still being a table. The number of conditions, the rather massive number of conditions that have to be quasi-stable for this to appear the way it appears is actually astounding. If you just increase the oxygen content of this room to a certain point, this thing can burst into flames with very little difficulty. Along with us. You change the temperature a little bit, just a few degrees, and things are quite different. Things will be quite different as the temperature changes a few degrees, but that's over a longer period of time. But even in the very moment, there's so many things that have to be just exactly sort of a stable coincidence of fluxes of conditions, that the dance of the present moment is actually really astoundingly remarkable. And that's the practice that you were suggesting today, in terms of you just read the text and you just see exactly what's going on in the moment. That kind of practice, where you're practicing through motion, allows you to see something of the momentary dynamics. That's an entry point into kind of a very deep practice about the dynamics of what arises. So it's, but that piece of like, well, everything looks kind of stable, and then you just think about, well, let's just pick one variable and kind of go, change it to there. Change the mass of the earth. You all start floating off. Atmosphere's gone.
Well, what if you change your perspective? If I'm a termite, that's
No
lunch.
gravity, no atmosphere.
Or if you're feeling sick today,
If you're a
and then
termite,
everything
that's
else.
lunch.
Yeah,
That's
that's right.
shift all the perspectives too.
When you were a termite. Those are just
She
words,
has
right?
her
But they
hand
change
up
everything in the way you're looking at something.
Miriam has her hand up.
Swansha.
I saw
Oh,
a couple of
sorry.
hands, I don't know
Yeah.
who's first.
I just have a semantic question. Samsara, is it the equivalent of the relative world, or does it sort of imply that we are confused and therefore it exists? Or does it?
Hey.
You really want me to answer? The relative world.
Let's fight over it, and then you can see what it means.
No, after you.
No, you're wrong.
So the question was, the relative world, is the relative world the equivalent of samsara?
Right, or does
Does
samsara
it include
imply or
samsara?
require that we be confused in order for it to kind of exist?
You're back.
Elaborating the question on the fly.
Is it independent of our confusion?
Exactly.
Definitely not.
What's the sound of one hand clapping?
What?
I said, what's the sound of one hand clapping is a joke.
Well, that's so yesterday.
A lot of us are from yesterday.
What do you think, Miriam?
The reason why I'm asking the question is because I don't know the origin of the word samsara. And I think if I knew more about that, then I'd be able to answer it better. My impression is, just my impression is that it's sort of understanding the relative world requires confusion too. Knowing that the relative world exists requires that confusion in a sense. So,
Getting there.
I don't know.
Just say yes and move on.
Okay, I'll just say fine.
Knowing the relative world requires the confusion.
I don't know,
And
does
the
it?
Buddha could never know the relative world. This is a big debate, whether the Buddha, how the Buddha relates to the relative world.
I think you have to answer the question, what
Is
does
that-
world mean?
Yeah, what is this world mean?
Well, we were talking at length here, you were talking at length about relative versus ultimate, right? And relative being empty of inherent existence. And so what I was wondering is the word samsara is simply empty of relative of independent existence, it's all interdependent and yada yada. Or is samsara implying more than just that?
More than just what?
More than just our experience of the world is of things that are interdependent and empty of dependent existence. Independent existence. If you'd like, you can send me on a task and have me look up the origins of the word samsara. Would you like me to do that?
Well, I mean, I think it's worthwhile looking up those things. I'm not sure that will give you what you're looking for.
Okay. I was just curious, and I really thought it was gonna be a quick answer. Whoops.
I wanna say one thing about it, which I've said in this very room at least a dozen times, but it just feels relevant to me, that I was once walking with a respected teacher, and we ended up talking about different realms, like so that you could be born in this realm or that realm, and you'd have the experience of being a this or that, and so on. and I said, I just have a lot of trouble, I don't have any confidence in that whole system somehow of 6 realms and all this. And I said, it feels an awful lot like to me, like my kind of sort of fake, cheap replica of my Christian upbringing. Like even that was maybe a little more profound. And so he sort of pulled the stops out and played the organ at top volume. And what he said was, that's because you think the realms exist. And so then we got into a discussion of, a little bit of a discussion on Christianity, which I don't fully remember what we talked about, but one thing was, if you do certain things in this life, from a Christian perspective, there's a room prepared for you somewhere where you don't want to go. And it's there, and they're waiting. And actually, in some Buddhist stories, Buddhism has that too in it. But in the stories that inspire me, that story isn't there. In the stories that I'm inspired by, there's no such thing as hell realms, human realms, and so on as inherently existing. They don't. And so what he said was that he said, I think it was maybe a God realm or one of the realms. He said that realm does not exist until someone is born into it, which was another way of saying, until you experience it, you don't experience it. And it literally does not exist. And if you land in the human realm, you're human for a while, and then you die, and whatever happens, happens. But it's like last night's dream. There was no place until you were asleep and you had the dream. And so it was kind of combined with, you see, he didn't say this, I'm saying it now. You're asleep, therefore you're confused about what's going on. You're dreaming. When you wake up, you'll see there wasn't any such place. Even though you could feel it, taste it, smell it, like do everything that you would do ordinarily, it wasn't there. And then he said the capper was just like this. And that short conversation completely changed my relationship with the realms. I can work with this. I know what it's like to be asleep and dream and wake up and fall asleep and dream and not know whether you're dreaming or awake, and all the confusion of that. Seemed like I can have confidence in that. So anyway, that's it.
If you just stick with the question of does samsara require confusion? That one just as a kind of as equations, that one is pretty simple to say. Yes, samsara does depend upon confusion. That's kind of there is kind of equivalence there.
You have to scream.
Yeah. So that's but when you go over to start to talk about the relative world, and kind of is that, well then, if you just take out relative, the world, is the world samsara, then it's, well, the notion of this kind of this overall appearance, how does that arise? How does that relate to our confusion? Then the word relative kind of almost sort of confuses matters a little bit. But if you just extract the word relative out of it, and then just say, well, now we're relative. We're talking about the play of interdependence. And then to say, well, is the play of interdependence and confusion the same? No.
Thank you.
How are we doing, Miriam?
oh, really confused, but I guess that's where I'm supposed to be. No, thank you, that it actually did help.
How would you apply that to Chenrezig practice?
What's the that?
Interdependence and, confusion, I guess.
So, dig deep and tell me why it wouldn't be exactly parallel. Another thing, why did you ask the question?
Because
What's
we're
that?
here to practice Chenrezig, so.
What? Say that again.
We are here to practice Chenrezig today, so I'm trying to relate it all to Chenrezig.
And?
Coming up blank.
Huh?
I'm coming up blank right now.
On what?
I'm relating it. I can relate the emptiness piece.
I think one thing is we're struggling with this thing, which is actually a kind of wonderful thing, and it's the reason why I felt like interdependence this morning would be a good idea was because of a number of things that Rinpoche had said, both at the Unitarian Church and also up at SCOL, that just seemed completely apropos. And so we talked about those things this morning, and well, what to say? Chenrezig. I think one of the things that has been on my mind for a long time, I mean by that at least some years, was that we were not, it didn't feel to me like we were actually doing everything that we could with Chenrezig. And by that I didn't mean necessarily that we would do week-long or month-long Chenrezig retreats or what, but it was rather something else, something small somehow. And so I know, for example, that if you request a loom, kind of a reading empowerment for reading the text, the teacher who reads the text to you to hear will read every word in the text. So that's a piece of where I thought, let's read the titles, let's read the small, let's just see, like, what is this text? Forget the teaching on it, what about the text? Well, I know that, because I've had a lot of looms, I know that most looms are kind of boring. And actually, it's okay that they're boring, which is a very interesting kind of teaching in and of itself. Like, you listen to a text being read and the teacher will often say, like, you can go to sleep. Doesn't matter. And most of us would say, well, how do I get it then? Well, you should by that point know the way you think you get it is not what's being talked about. And so I thought, well, we'll do the text different. One is, it'll be kind of shocking, because this is not how we do Chenrezig. So why are we doing it this way? And so then I thought, well, we do it this way because we've never done it this way before, nor have we ever done it any other way before. So we brought that up this morning a number of times. Like, you read the same word over and over, it's not the same word, over and over. Every time you open your mouth to say something, it's something that has never been said. Every time you feel an emotion or a physical sensation, you've never felt that before. We put the name on it, I felt that before. I felt that thing, it's hot, it's cold, it's rough, it's smooth, so on. but actually, we're just cheating ourselves out of the freshness of the experience over and over again. So I thought, this is what the practice is about. Getting in touch with the interconnectedness of things. You visualize yourself as a demon, you feel like a demon. If you visualize yourself as a demon often enough and assign enough qualities to it, the day will come when that's how you act. And if you fill your mind with loving kindness and caring, even for people who wish you harm, the day will come when you're a saint. You can't not fill your mind with certain things and not become those things. So, as we know, it is really hard to consistently fill your mind with anything. You know? It has a
Even though
million.
it's constantly full.
It's constantly full.
I
Yeah,
understand.
it's already full. So you put one marble in and another marble falls out. That's what we mean by lose your marbles, you know? I thought it was actually a good practice of Chenrezig, because we didn't know that it was the practice of Chenrezig except by the text. The name on the text said it was, but otherwise we had no idea that it was Chenrezig. Oh, except for one thing. That's what we always do on the Sunday in odd months. Even months.
Well,
Yeah.
that's not entirely right, because if you've done Chenrezig enough, you know the practice anyway. So, like, even though we just read it straight through like we did,
So how'd
I
that
still
work?
did the practice, so,
How'd that work? How'd you know you were doing the practice?
so I know the practice enough. But,
So-
it was a different experience for sure,
Well, of course, it's a different experience.
yeah.
And you could in fact say that merely reading the title on the text is the practice of Chenrezig. And would you say that that only happens when you really know the practice really well? No,
I don't
maybe
know.
actually that's exactly when you don't get
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
because you already know. Can you actually get what the practice of Chenrezig is as an internal experience when you already know what the experience is? This is Bailey, I'm not so sure about that.
Sure.
The mere fact that you could recite
You
it
just
over
don't
and
know.
over and get every last syllable exactly right, which is actually considered a fairly important and, thing to do with a text. And though I think the extreme version of it may not be as important as the strong intention to not miss any pieces and to get the whole thing. But still, when you know it too well, is Chenrezig about knowing it too well? It may not be about knowing it too well. So this morning's practice, for me, was a sense of, could we kind of, in a positive, pleasant way, disrupt our usual way of doing Chenrezig? And it felt to me like we did that. Even, I think it was challenging for Melinda. If she was here, I'd say this. So I think it was challenging, but she rose to it and did it. And I think probably everybody had a different experience than we normally do with Chenrezig. So the question is, can we engage in the practice in such a way that it's authentic, it's in accordance with what the practice is, and yet it feels to us like I never did it before. It's completely fresh. And, my confession is, I hope we took some small step in that direction. That's all. I don't know where it leads, I don't have any plan, I don't have anything, but I know that on the program council, we've talked about, like, moving things, it's been a long time that we do the same thing. And I find myself, it's more difficult to engage in the practice when there's a metronome that counts it off in precise measurements, every last thing. And sometimes it's easy, but in the end, personally, more difficult to actually engage in the practice. Because I already know what's coming up. I know what's coming up, I know what's gonna be dished up, I know what's gonna taste like, smell like, look like, everything. And so, no surprise, it tasted, looked like, smelled like, everything that I already know about it.
How would you, if you wanted to do that at home by yourself,
Oh, you shouldn't
what
try it
would
at home.
you, what would
Try it at
you,
home.
I mean, just reading the text, would that be,
What'd you just say?
give a different experience as well? Like,
What?
if you know, I mean, here we are in a group situation,
Yeah, yeah.
doing it that way. So to have a different kind of experience of Chenrezig at home, just try it again that same way, or what's your recommendation? I'm all
Do it
for
exactly
shaking it
the
up.
same, so there'd be absolutely no difference between.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
right.
I could do it on one foot.
Yeah, right.
Exact.
Try
Whatever you do, don't put your makeup on different than you do every other day, cause no one will recognize you. And it's kind of
What
has
makeup?
that sense about it.
First of all.
I wanna be able to recognize all the experiences and the things about it, so if I do it different, I may not know that I did it even. And there's a problem here, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to make a discovery. And we're trying to make the big discovery, the awakened mind, which is not a discovery to be made in the ordinary sense. There's never gonna be a time when we say to ourselves, there it is. It's 35 inches long, 16 inches wide, weighs about 1.5 pounds, and so on. There's no ordinary discovery to be made. Including, I think, in an esoteric way, like just my own experience, recognizing your own experience seems to me to be a precursor, a necessary precursor to recognizing the nature of mind. Just recognizing your own experience unfolding without you trying to drive it towards something in particular. So when I look at Chenrezig and other practices like that, sometimes I have that sense of this is not meant to be an absolutely rote, identical reoccurrence every time that I sit down and do it. And so then I find for years I think, so why do the Tibetans do it just like that every time? And the answer, the only really deep answer that I can come to that can be verbalized is they actually don't do it exactly every time. And it's known from somebody's side that it's not the same. And those who know that it's really not the same, but has never occurred before, are probably actually getting it. That's the most I can verbalize about it. I don't know what else to say. But when we have an insight practicing Chenrezig or any other tantric practice, a Yido practice of some kind, when we really have a sense of insight that's the same moment in which we recognize that we have never done this practice before. And tomorrow will not be a second or a third time either. And that is our instruction. Every thought that arises is new. Well, every thought that arises is new. How about the way you visualize Chenrezig? How about the way you recite the mantra? How about your understanding of the various accoutrements and the decorations on Chenrezig and so on? How about all of those things? Are those not also completely unique first occurrences? Could we train ourselves such that that's our experience, that we've never been there before? I think it's helpful in a way to ponder that in all kind of ordinary things. Like, I can sit here and you can take this microphone away and then you put it back and I say, I immediately have the experience, oh, there's the microphone again. It's so deep, you can't you can't easily shut it off. I could say to myself, oh, brand new microphone, but it'd be completely a fake job, you know? My experience is, there's the microphone, there's Bill, there's Dora, there's Zopa. But is it really? We don't have to look very far to say, no, that's not actually Pat. This is right in this moment, the Pat you've never seen. And you better look close because you'll never see it again. That's a far more interesting world to live in than the one where everything is fixed and recognizable and predictable. And I think that in a way, the question of what is samsara is the world where we have a fixed, predictable, everything is always like measurable and so on, but it really isn't. And so we inadvertently experience the truth, which is not really what we thought it was going to be, and therein lies the suffering. In various measure, depending. You are not the woman I married. So I love that phrase. You are not the woman I married.
One of the things in Chenrezig practice is that we've been talking a lot about interdependence today, and the way that we appear somewhat stably is just this play. It's this play of interdependence. And it involves some impression of a body and certain kind of characteristics. It embodies some kind of sense of history and intention, personality. So there's thoughts, there's feelings, there's communication, things internal and external. And all these things are things that we engage in the practice of Chenrezig. But we're not particularly aware of how that rather miraculous play of body, speech, and mind arises ordinarily. We take it to be this thing, the me and my history and my story. Of course it's going to turn out this way. And we can actually get lost in of course it's going to turn out this way when we do Chenrezig practice too. But when you said originally, how could we take this kind of the spirit of what Michael introduced this morning, and when we were sitting at home and doing our Chenrezig, how might we do that, is to actually let go of that sense of I kind of go from this little bit here that's sort of stable and familiar to this little bit here over that's kind of stable. And I get about 10 of those together and it feels more or less like I did the practice. But there are all this gaps and stuff in between, and being able to watch that whole process like that, to go to how it's actually arising moment to moment, that's one piece of it. That's how to bring this. There's also just a piece of just as we hold together our own self-image, we do a lot of maintenance to hold that together. We're given the opportunity in cultivating the view of ourselves as Chenrezig to hold together this other bundle of things that come together. And you could say the identity of the Bodhisattva. They're different things, but to actually be able to witness holding it together in kind of a conscious way that could actually be kind of that moment-to-moment awareness of this. And so we have both the training on the relative side, and Rinpoche spent a lot of time talking about just how we, and even the last 2 days up in Seattle, he talked about the Chenrezig practice. It is this opportunity to bring this sensibility of always keeping in mind these very positive qualities, kind of training our mind on the relative phenomena of valuing kindness and compassion, really putting ourselves in kind of contact with that, really sort of keeping our minds in kind of meeting with that, inspired by that. So there's that piece within the Chenrezig practice that goes to that play, the dynamic play. That's a very important piece of the practice. And even the way Rinpoche was teaching the last couple of days, you could just approach it from that side. Cool, good. But there's also that piece of how is this play actually occurring? And with Chenrezig practice, there is kind of a aspect of, you get a ringside seat, kind of, you know, pull up the chair, get the popcorn ready, now let's watch. Let's really, you know, let's really see what's going on in this. So there is that, and that he talked about a couple of times, the aspect of the completion aspect. And we usually think of the completion aspect, there is the dissolution, which then introduces us into something where we just let go. But he's saying that's actually more, it's more like a view that pervades. More almost, you could say either it's something that pervades the whole practice or sort of contains the whole practice. It's not something that, you know, da 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 da, completion, ding. It's not separate from it, but just being able to experience the play of the mind as we're engaging in the practice, then we start to be able to get more and more contact with just what is this play? What is this dynamic? What is this awareness?
Thanks.
Yeah, like it says, what is it? Appearance, sound. It's basically apparent phenomena and awareness, emptiness are inseparable. It's the last line before the mantra. That's one way to train.
Well, that's helpful.
So but it requires actually stepping out of the idea that this kind of point 1, point 2,
Right.
point 3, and then the rest of the stuff in between is just static. You know, ignore it. It's just
Yeah.
static. Oh, I was just distracted. Oh, I was this. Oh, I was that. Kind of the whole play of that, being able to bring that kind of freshness to it. Then it's also less frustrating too, because instead of only having 4 points in an entire hour, where I think I did the practice 4 times, because it's supposed to look like this, then we actually kind of just follow through. There's a kind of more.
You're going along with the ride instead of.
Yeah, instead of fighting it or
Yeah.
ignoring it.
I see. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and then that actually makes it easier to carry that sensibility out into the world too. You get just kind of like, this is the ride. What's going on now? What's up?
Souvage.
That's okay. They were ahead of me. So, I want to talk to you about the presence of the deity. In Chenrezig, Lama Michael, you said, right, that when Chenrezig appears, we should have a sense of the actual presence of the deity. Now, let's go to off cushion. So,
Let's go to what?
off cushion.
Okay.
Okay. Chenrezig is not normally the practice that I fall to when I'm off cushion. Okay. I'll use something else, whatever comes up, I handle it. But last week, I was in a situation in a room full of people, and there was grasping and expectations built up inside me, and things didn't go a certain way. And so, I was like the only one in that room, right, on one side. And for a minute, there was enough emotion inside me that I knew I had lost myself. It didn't materialize in the form of physical or speech, okay? But in my mind, I knew, that I lost ground. And at that point in time, if I could, I would have walked out of the room, but I couldn't walk out of the room. Generally, my approach is, I'm just going to leave soon. But later on, after the incident occurred and it was too much, I asked myself the question, you know what? I could have invoked the presence of the deity.
You could have what?
invoked
Invoked, I see,
the
okay.
presence of the deity.
Yeah.
And then I had an immediate reaction. I said, you know, I really can't do that because I don't do enough chin raising, and I can't quite depend on that. Right? So you know, there is a little bit of that, right? That you know, if I was doing it sufficiently, I could do it. So where I'm going with my question is that sometimes the situation can be so strong and so overwhelming that you need a presence. And is it okay
Mm.
for me to have invoked the presence of the deity? It's something special.
Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by invoke?
That I'm in the presence, that there is a witness beyond.
But that's what happens after you've invoked, right?
Yes, that's what happens after I invoke, but there it is reassuring, it's calming
Which is?
to know that I'm in the presence.
Oh, I see.
And even to bring that thought to mind
Mm-hmm.
it's relaxing. I mean, nobody can take that away from me. But I use it only on special occasions. I don't, like I said, I don't use it as it's not my normal practice. And you know, you can also abuse this. I mean, I come from a tradition, the Hindu tradition, that they do puja, you know, all the time, and you can misuse that.
Yep.
So I've tended to I've gravitated away from it. But I felt last week it was very strong. Nobody knew it. I knew it. Right? I knew what was going on inside me. But I wished for a few minutes that the deity was there. I wish the deity was there.
And it wasn't.
And it was not in my mind.
So what's your
So I'm
vision?
asking you, how is this something that can be used?
Is
Am I
it something that
violating
can be
principle?
used?
Yes, am I violating, you know, the sense of it? Obviously, you understand that there's grasping, expectation, all of that thing going on inside me.
Of course.
But I just wanted a shoulder to rest on.
Yep. And you got it, or not?
No, I didn't.
You did not.
I did not use it.
Do you know how to get it? You've had it, or not?
Yeah, I've had it. I mean, things don't get so extreme for me where I've lost my control of myself, you know, in my mind.
Yep.
But sometimes, you know, different things happen, right? The intensity of the situations are
Yep.
different.
Mm.
Sometimes you have to rely. I needed it, you know, like a friend in the room.
Yeah.
And not to take sides, but just the presence, right? I think is. Then I didn't know, you know. I said to myself, I don't. My immediate reaction was, well, how can you request it when you don't practice it? Is how I responded to myself.
Well, that's easy. We do that all the time. Yeah.
And to be accurate, you should say, I don't practice it enough, whatever enough means.
Yeah, whatever it
Yeah,
means. Yeah.
That's kind of critical.
I'm unworthy.
There's no required number of practices before you call on Shinrasi.
Call on chin raising more often and then
Yeah, then you'll be practicing more often.
Well, we do, there's an interesting question in there, which my guess is you cannot avoid, given your own history as you and I have talked about it personally, and also what you just disclosed about misuse of practices. So you were using the example of Hindu tradition. but there's misuse of practices in Buddhism, Christianity, like take your pick. There's misuse. There's misuse as of course, the people who misuse may not know that they're misusing. So one could ask the question, is it really misuse? If there's no intention to misuse, or just some kind of honest mistake. So again, I think the key thing here is, I could have someone who I think is an enemy, and I could engage in the practice of certain tantric traditions and wish that negative things happened to the person I think is my enemy. Now we would say that's a misuse of that practice. On the other hand, I might be thinking this person's bad for the world. So this is not about me, this is about somebody else. And we also know that could just be like an excuse to do what you otherwise would never do. Or it could be that you actually have some insight into something larger, and there's some stories about what we would say negative things being done to people who are about to collect a huge load of negative karma. And so now something is done that hurts them or hinders them or kills them even, and it's not considered a good thing to do, but it's also under certain circumstances can be not harmful to the person who does it. So it's complicated when we start talking about these kinds of things. I think the safer move here is to have a relationship with Chenrezig in the deepest sense that you can muster, whatever that is. But for example, and the Vajrayana is like full of this stuff, and I know that Hinduism is also, where you have a relationship with the deity. And maybe generally speaking, right here in this room, we may have a fairly soft or broad sense of what relationship means. And so in some circumstances somebody may invoke the deity or invoke the guru or invoke the Buddha or invoke Chenrezig or some other entity for help. And there's a lot of ways in which that can be done. And I think that once again, it's going to be an issue of what you fill your mind with is what you get out. It's kind of like your water bottle. You know, if you put orange juice in it, when you're thirsty and you drink it, it's orange juice. It's not something else. So if you have a relationship with Chenrezig or with some other deity, a wrathful deity or a peaceful deity, then the more potential there is in abuse in the practice, the more deeply you have to have explored it, or you're likely to end up not helping yourself. That's my sense, and I think that's partly why many teachers will not impart the teachings of certain kinds of practices until that person has met certain requirements, not so that they won't hurt others, but rather that they won't hurt themselves. So you're just working with Chenrezig, which shouldn't be a real problem, but it can be a problem when you have an expectation that Chenrezig is going to deliver something. Solace, for example, right? Just a sense of well-being. Or if I'm afraid, nervous, uncomfortable, I'd like to feel comfortable, not afraid, and so on. But when we invoke help in those things, we have to be open to the possibility that if we were in front of a flesh and blood teacher, that person might say, Suvansh, what you're experiencing is exactly what you need to experience. Now with the deity, we already have a kind of tenuous sense of their reality more often than not. we may just decide to ignore that advice. We may invoke the kind of, we might invoke the intelligence of our own ignorance, for example, which is to say that, yeah, I've heard that before. That's not what I want. I want something else. In which case, we'll get something else, but it's not likely to be exactly what we want. So the way we hurt ourselves in that situation is we continue to pursue it until it turns into manipulation. The manipulation finally gets us the answer we want, but it doesn't last, and so then we feel betrayed by the relationship with that entity. So there's so many ways in which that can happen. And it's just, in a way, you know, the relationship with the deity needs to share a lot with our firm commitment and relationship with a real living person. If it doesn't have that, then we don't get the benefit of what we would get normally from a real person. Somebody who could say, for example, Suvant or somebody else, I actually only need to use you as an example here as you're sitting there, but somebody who would say, like to me, Michael, you know, you're asking for this thing, but actually, I'm not going to give you that. I'm going to give you this thing, and you need to do this thing. Now, depending upon the person who said that to me, I might say, okay, and embrace it completely. On the other hand, I might say, thanks, I gotta go now, I got a lunch appointment. You know?
I got a lunch appointment with the thing that I wanted as opposed to what I was getting.
That's right.
Continue grasping elsewhere.
So the difficulty here is that we actually function better as ordinary sentient beings with a flesh and blood person in front of us because we are confident, just to put quotes around it, this person's real. Chenrezig, I'm not so sure. And that's a double-edged sword. We come to think that Chenrezig is real. Let's just step back to the place that we know is part of that practice, which is the reality of Chenrezig is none other than, guess who? The person who's engaging in the practice. Like when Rinpoche said, you have the pure mind, you are in the Pure Land. Not like that's a ticket that you can cash in at some point. In that very moment, you are there. And in the moment when you're not there, you are not in the Pure Land. You're somewhere else. We don't have much confidence in that, except that conceptually it makes total sense. Doesn't it? If my mind is angry, I'm angry. What is there to talk about? If I look at the anger and say it's clear appearance and that's all I know about it, the next thing is I probably will have some experience of that. And if I do that a lot, I'll have the experience more often. And so, if you went to your teacher and said, I'm having this problem, the teacher might say, oh, Suvanj, we've talked about this so much. This is an old issue. So let's look at what you've done and haven't done and all that. And then the advice, you'd probably feel like, yeah, that's really good advice. I'm going to follow that. But when it just pops out of your head while you're visualizing yourself as Chenrezig, you may or may not follow it. You may or may not feel betrayed when it doesn't work. You may feel like really the deity is concrete and solid when it does work. It's tricky. So that's why with the practice of Chenrezig in particular, we focus on our intention to benefit others. Simple. We know in the moment that we put that intention in place that it's like true or not. We don't know whether we'll succeed, but we can know the intention pretty well. So it gets tricky when we get further away from it. With Chenrezig, it's all about the intention to benefit others. And what does it say in the 2 lines near the end of the text? It's all about intention. It's not a practice for some other kind of thing to happen. So I think if you do Chenrezi, you don't have to have done it ever before to engage in the intention to benefit all sentient beings. We don't even have the means yet to do that, right? To step into the arena with all sentient beings to benefit them. We're knocked out in the first round. But our intention can still have been totally like it's on. And that's what we're promising in our practice of Chenrezi. And Chenrezi promises to be a vehicle and a support for us to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's not what you wanted to hear though, is it?
It's true. But it's okay. I mean,
That's okay. Every practice that we engage in is based upon that. I mean, the reason we have so much Chenrezi, along with other practices, I don't want to use this word, but I'm going to use it anyway, just for the sake of getting the job done. But the level that we're at, we need to be working at the level that we're actually at with our understanding. And so with Chenrezi, we all know that we each would like to be treated kindly, fairly, mostly kindly, and with a sense of appreciation. I think almost everybody wants to be appreciated, would like to be appreciated, would like to be spoken to kindly, would like to be around people who are wiser than I am, but they don't look down on me. They treat me like I'm an inherent Buddha, just not realized yet. We all want those kinds of things. And Chenrezi gives us a door through which to enter that realm. So that's why when we were all going to India and meeting Bokrimshe, I think probably a lot of us, I can say from my own side, every time I went to see him, when I went to see him, I would be holding in my mind that I'm going to meet, in this case, Tara. Because that was his practice. So I figured that's his practice. He's more Tara than I am. So therefore I go to sit down with Tara. And when I could go and sit down and I could hold the view that I'm actually meeting with Tara, the meetings went great. And all my expectations were gone. It's like I figured at that point, like, what could go wrong? In a positive way, not in a joking way. Like, what could go wrong? Nothing. You're sitting with Tara, you're going to get some advice, you're going to follow that advice. And no matter what happens, it was the right thing to do. So all those things coming together kind of supplant and kind of make all the other things not so important. And in the process of all of it, I can say also, I don't know that everyone's relationship with everyone's teacher would be like this, but sitting down with Bokrimshe, it always felt like whatever happens between the moment that I walk into the room and the moment that I walk out and everything beyond that, it's okay. It's all, if it isn't working out, it's because I'm not seeing how it's working out. And one could say, that's a sellout. You've tricked yourself. You've manipulated yourself into a corner. But what's new about that? That's just what we all do all the time. So, and we never know what work out actually means. So even in your situation that you're talking about, we always have a short box in which we see that we measure, well, that was the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do. But I think the more profound teaching is, you will never know. You will never objectively know whether what you did was the best thing, the worst thing, in between. You'll never know. Because once launched, truth of interdependence, there is no end to the chain. So you can never actually have the satisfaction of it worked out perfect. Now maybe the Buddha has a different, perspective on that. But that's my sense that the teaching is what you can, to use your word, control, is your intention, your aspiration, relying on whatever practice you've done, the things you've done before, which are the things that drive your thoughts, your actions, your speech, and everything else. You can only rely on those things that they will bear their fruit in time, in some way, and it's virtually impossible to trace back. This happened because I thought that. This is very unsatisfying. We would like to know that was a really good thing. And of course, we have to make that judgment. I did something, so it looks like something positive happened, but the deeper thing is to notice that, well, it looks like something positive happened, but I will actually never see the end of the chain. It's not for us to see. This is why the Buddha said he didn't want to explain karma, because there's no end to these chains. So until complete enlightenment, you can't actually see what could have happened, did happen. You don't know. So I think back to the original principle is you need to be clear about your intentions when you engage in the practice, and engage in the practice as fully as possible, and come to the place, if you can, to relate to Chenrezig like you would relate to an extremely kind teacher who is willing, if necessary, to just put their life on the line for you. What would you do with such a person who is very kind and you experience them as being very wise? You wouldn't betray them, that's for sure. You'd probably do almost anything they asked, because when you looked, you probably couldn't find any better reason for doing something else. And it's still difficult. We always make a joke around here that one of the key things in the practice of the Dharma, if you have a teacher who you rely upon, is you must be very careful what questions you ask. Because with that person, what they say when you ask a question, you really should do. If you don't do it, you're damaging your ability to use the power of that connection. Will drain very quickly. So that's the kind of complicated, dangerous end of the stick. Is that if you have such a relationship and you don't follow the injunctions of that teacher, becomes quite difficult. And you can always go back to that teacher and say, I couldn't do it. What can I do to remove any residue of my disappointment in not doing that? And they'll always give you something to help sweep all that away. And it tends to work if you take it the right way.
Thank you, Lama.
Break?
It's late, isn't it? Is that what you said? It's
I
late.
said break.
A break.
3:35.
I guess that's the same thing as late, isn't it?
We could take a break and come back and do Mamu aspirations.
Okay.
Not pretty much.
That's about all we got time for now. It was great. By this
Virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all means without exception in this state. much, thank you.
Thank you, Lama.
Yes.